skills.
Yes, honey. Yes. Welcome back to another fun-filled episode of Fixing This Bronco in Project Breakhorse. In this installment, we're going to work on the Ford 9-inch rear end. And after my first epic fail on the Dana 44, I learned a lot about how these differentials work, which is good. I mean, that's what's required. Knowing how these work so that you don't have fatal errors along the way. And I believe that I have enough knowledge now on how to put these together, so I'm going to get this reassembled. I have directions that I found online as a supplement. I'm going to go through with what I believe to be the right way for this build. And then that way I can get information, feedback from doing this myself and getting it rolling and say like, well, I don't really like these gears in the back, I'm going to get them swapped out. So I'm going to go stock for now, 3 5s in the back, and then if I want to make a change, I'll have some experience and I can just go about it in that regard. So first up, we've got the carrier itself, pinion support, the pinion. I've got a kit here from Yukon. I got a new yoke, some crush washers. So in the kit, they've got all Timken bearings. No, I'm not sponsored, but I wanted to get these Timkens for the build. So, all right, there goes some of it. So I'm going to get these parts out, figure out what has to go on. My first step is going to be getting the bearing on this pinion itself. So we're going to get this set up.
First, you want to take the bearing that came off of here, which is this one, and match it with the new set. And you can do this by matching the numbers on
Bearing and race.
the bearing and the race. And this one, it's going to be M88048. So in order to do this, we're going to heat this bearing with the heat gun and then drop it on.
Okay, it's hot, nice and easy.
Woo! Perfect fit.
See?
It's still smoking.
Because your gloves were burning.
So now we want to take our race and drive it into our pinion support.
Stop. Did you hear that sound difference?
Yeah, it changed.
That's how you know it's fully in there.
Woo!
Let me see. Okay, this is what you're doing. You're coming in like this. Mm-hmm. I need you down here to square.
Can I get a step stool?
No.
So we went ahead and put in our bearing race on the other side so that we can go ahead and get our preload figured out. We're doing the measurements right now. We're using a solid spacer with shims instead of the crush collar.
Now that we have our shim pack in, we measured the thickness of that. We're going to heat the bearing, put it down here, and then put on the yoke to test the preload. Now we have our old pinion nut on here. We're going to go ahead and test the preload on these bearings.
Can't see that high.
There's no preload on it whatsoever.
Not even a little.
No. It's probably not tight enough on this nut. After 6 attempts, we finally got this preload to spec. This is calling for 13 to 15 inch-pounds. The shim that's in there, so we have the solid spacer. Solid spacer is 43 thousandths. We put in an additional 15 to 16. So that's roughly what, 59 preloads correct. We've got the pinion support basically all finished. Now what we got to do is go drive in the bearing for the pilot bearing and put in that retainer clip. Alright, now we have that pilot bearing in the housing. We got to drive that in. Now that pilot bearing's in there, we have our little washer that's going to get in there and hold this in place. Our pinion retainer, pilot bearing retainer is in. And one word to the wise, make sure you don't forget the seal that goes in behind your yoke on this pinion support. Now what we want to do is we want to get this O-ring that goes right around here out, grease it up, grease the inside of this, and then set this down in here so that we can see what shim that we need for this depth. The next step, once we put in this retaining washer, now we need to go ahead and put a shim on here to set the pinion depth. This is 13.5 thousandths, so we're going to use it to start, and then once we check our pattern, if it is incorrect, then we'll take it back out later and then fix it. Now we're going to torque this pinion support down to this case using our torque wrench and 35 foot-pounds of torque, so that when we go ahead and turn this over and try and get our wear pattern, it's going to be an accurate measurement. Picking up on the Ford 9-inch, we got our pinion squared away. We got our bearings pressed onto our carrier. Now what we want to do is check for our backlash and what the pattern looks like on here. So what we did is we put in our adjuster nuts. We've got our caps on. What I'm going to do first is take these nuts out and put thread locker on them, and then torque these to 80 foot-pounds. From there, I can then just move these adjuster screws to kind of mess with the backlash, and then finally I'll check my pattern so then I can see, does the pinion need to come in and out. So let's go ahead and do that now. Right now we're trying to measure our backlash, and we have the dial indicator set up, so when I move this forward, zeroed again. Looking at about 20, 22. So what I need to do in order to take that slop out is I need to push in towards the ring gear, or I'm sorry, towards the pinion. So the ring gear has to come towards the pinion and take that out. So what I'm going to do is take this adjuster screw. I have my spanner wrench here. I'm going to take this. She's in there pretty tight, so I'm going to get that adjusted and then come back to it. Okay, we went ahead and measured our backlash is within spec, 10 thousandths. Now our pattern though. Our pattern, I believe, at first glance it looked okay, but then when I find the right adjustment, I want to say we're looking at this one here, this bottom one. So my pinion is too close. I got to add shims. So what I'm going to do, flip this over, take off these bolts for the support, pull this out, add a shim, test my pattern again to see where that takes me. We have paint all over this. The pattern is towards the toe on the drive side and towards the heel on the coast. So I'm pretty happy with that. Just like the front, this could be potentially changed out down the line. So I'm going to get this back together with the pattern the way it is. Additionally, the preload on the pinion is about 16, 17, 18 once I get it started. So I'm happy with that. And then lastly, the backlash is at 10 thousandths. So that's what these directions call for. It could probably go a little bit tighter, but I'm good with this. So all I have to do is take these pinion support bolts back out, put some Loctite on them, and that's that. This is ready to be dropped onto the housing, and then I'm going to mock up my axles and see how those fit. So I guess I got to put my set screws in here. So those get torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. So those will go directly into the adjuster caps to hold those in place. So I'll do those and then put the Loctite on all that stuff, and we'll get to the housing next. We got the axle housing back out. Before I put any gasket sealer and gasket on it, what I want to do is take it upright and install my axle seals here on the outside. So I'm going to do that quickly and then move on to dropping in the third member. Alright, now that our outer axle seals are in, I'm going to get this back up, and let's get RTV and a gasket on here so we can drop this third member in. Now that our housing has RTV, gasket, and RTV on it, we're going to go ahead and drop this third member on here. Third member weighs probably 80 to 90 pounds, so make sure that you get it lined up. The ring gear going in this depression in the housing. So let's get this thing lifted. Oh yeah! Okay, stop. Can you lift up?
Yeah.
Lift up hard. There you go. Alright. Now we just gotta get past some of those threads. There it is. Huge success, Carol, from HR. Alright, so what I need to do now is I have copper washers. This is just a cast piece of metal. Copper washers are used so they can go around the depressions and recesses and valleys that are really small on this metal, and it crushes and conforms to those areas so that when you put the nut on there, it makes a tight seal. So I have copper washers I'm going to put on here. But for the time being, I have the old nuts that came off of this. I'm actually going to get top locking nylons tomorrow. So for the time being, I'm just going to screw these 10 on here, and then I'm going to call this axle good. Alright, friends, family, foes, the Ford 9-inch is fully rebuilt. We got our third member already dropped in, and new crush washers, new nylon locking nuts, torqued down, ready to go. So stay tuned. We're going to put brakes together and get that chassis rolling.